Wherefore, Series 3, Episode 412. Possibly. One of the many cafes of Stroud is obliged to shut at short notice. Officially, this is due to COVID, because that's an easier sort of thing to tell people, and no one is inclined to question it. The reality is a bit more complicated and begins on a Monday morning with what appears to have been an out-of-date Swiss roll inadvertently left on a counter. The Swiss roll had apparently chomped its way through its own packaging, leaving a shredded mess of single-use plastic in its wake. The roll itself has gone, leaving a trail of carnage. Ingredients had been gnawed on and consumed. No one admits to having bought a Swiss roll. The cafe does not serve pre-packaged cakes. The people who work in the cafe know that none of them was a likely candidate for having bought this sugary monstrosity. You have no doubt leapt to the only obvious conclusion that this was never a cake-based Swiss roll, but instead that eggs have hatched, and now there are Swiss hawk roll moth caterpillars rampaging about town. Like all caterpillars, the Swiss hawk roll moth grows rapidly, consuming its preferred sustenance. Most caterpillars have a plant or two of preference. Unfortunately, the Swiss hawk roll moth is omnivorous in the extreme, and willing to eat almost anything. It grows at an alarming pace. Cafe staff find it under one of the tables where it is in the process of eating a chair. By this stage it is nearly 2 feet long, still with its distinctive Swiss roll markings. At first they mistakenly believe it to be a giant hungry cake, which is understandable, really. Only when it turns and tries to attack one of them do they realize the true threat. Fortunately, the bigger the Swiss hawk roll moth caterpillars get, the slower they become, and at 2 feet long the horror is already less lively, and no one loses a foot. It only takes an hour or so for news of this development to reach Whitminster. She experiences curious mixed feelings of both horror and delight. Swiss hawk roll moth caterpillars can of course wreak tremendous damage. But on the plus side, unlike a conspiracy theory, you can pin a caterpillar down and stab it to death with any pointy implement that comes to hand. Conspiracy theories are much harder to kill. And you aren't supposed to kill the conspiracy theorists, and Whitminster has a lot of barely suppressed rage right now. She takes the precaution of putting on a pair of large Wellington boots and donning overalls because caterpillar splattering can be pretty messy at this scale. She heads to the shops, looking for signs of activity and trying to trace the original egg site. All of the shop owners know Whitminster in some capacity or another. Most of them have no idea who she really is, and all of them are happy to open up anywhere she wants to poke about in. During the course of the morning, she tracks down 3 further sites of caterpillar activity, but remains unsure as to how many of the ravenous beasts may be on the loose. A little after midday, one of the caterpillars, now nearly 4 feet long, bursts out of the cellar of Made in Stroud, leaving a trail of chewed ceramics in its wake as it hurtles down the road towards the sub-rooms. It looks exactly like a massive chocolate-coated Swiss roll with a lovely, if immense, fondant filling. Some caterpillars look more like the jam sponge variant, but the differences are superficial. You may not be able to tell which end has the mouth until it opens and tries to eat you. The rampaging caterpillar consumes a small dog in a single gulp. People flee in terror. Other people whip out their phones and start recording, more interested in fame than survival. Whitminster dashes down the street after the Swiss roll. She is armed with a very large toasting fork. The caterpillar, oblivious to her, pauses to have a chew on a bench, but finds this unsatisfying. Once they get a taste for blood, they tend to go off eating inanimate objects. Having successfully consumed a dog, this one now craves flesh and is slowly working out what this means. It rotates, slowly, and advances on a small child whose parent has, until this moment, been trying to film the whole drama. Whitminster runs awkwardly in her Wellington boots and catches up to the caterpillar before it reaches the child. She stabs furiously with the toasting fork, which she has extended to maximum length. The chocolatey outer shell of the beast breaks under her attack, revealing the gooey cake and filling inside. It's like a Swiss roll all the way through. The cake-like nature of the innards persuades the onlookers that this isn't some horrendous monster hell-bent on eating children. All of a sudden it looks more like a prank. "Some sort of performance art, I suppose," someone mutters loudly. "I bet they got funding for that. Bloody waste of taxpayers' money." The caterpillar twitches, and Whitminster stabs it a few more times, partly to be on the safe side, and partly because she is very much in a stabby mood. A small creature scuttles out from behind the plant pots. It has a long, ratty sort of snout and a row of what look like bagpipe chanters coming out of its spine. It emits a drone as it moves. A second one follows, looking a lot like a kazoo with legs. The open end turns out to be a mouth, and it sets to work on the caterpillar cake. In a matter of minutes, there are half a dozen of them, honking, growling, and consuming. Whitminster watches fascinated, trying to work out which one of them is responsible for the extended drum solo as they remove all evidence of the carnivorous cake. The jazz vermin don't seem to recognise her, but she doesn't mind. She knows them, and watches with a warm, proud feeling. She imagines this must be how it feels to be an auntie. They are not exactly her children, but she feels involved in their lives, their musical chortlings, and their general well-being. She hopes they get a taste of a Swiss roll, because she is probably going to need their help.